Good morning. Friday morning, and today I would like to talk about how sound is part of a meditation practice, and then how that sort of broadly shapes our engagement with not just meditation, not just sound, but our kind of embodied physicality, right? So that's a lot to think about, and I kind of lump it under the word sonicism. And so sonicism starts with the expectation or the understanding that um, we absorb sound waves physically, and then we transduce those sound waves into neurological information. Right, that's what's happening in our ears, but I think it also is happening more broadly, like our skin responds to sound waves. Sound waves are, in one form, just energy moving through the air. They're literally the particles of the air hitting us. And so, if you've ever been if you've ever been in a loud concert or um, by a loud train, I I still remember one time I was in a train station, uh, very old fashioned. It was in Paris, so still very 19th century train station, but uh, and it was early morning, so I was still half asleep, and it was at a time when I was still drinking, so I was probably kind of hungover as well. But I walked down a platform to get to the carriage, and on each side were these enormous engines just churning away. And the sonic impact was enormous. I felt like I was a foot off the ground walking just because the force of the sound was enough that you could physically feel it. Um, a couple of weeks ago at the symphony, we were at the Pittsburgh Symphony concert. They played Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony, uh, which has a large and exciting brass section. 8 French horns, 4 trombones, tubas, euphoniums, everything. And towards the end of that piece, they all blast away. I mean, one of the great joys of a symphony is when a symphonic piece is really expanded out, and those instruments, and they all sort of rang out in the back of the hall, and they just fill you. It has that same impact of a jet engine. Uh, I've written, I've actually written music that's inspired by being in an MRI. So if you've never had to go into an MRI, the magnetic scanning tubes, um, I'm glad you've never had to do it. But if you have, then you know how loud those things are, right? This isn't the CAT scan. That's sort of like a fancy X-ray. There's a tube with with a big magnet that's literally spinning. Um, I will link to that video because I get scanned a couple of times a year to make sure that everything is in order. And I wrote a piece for piano and electronics where the electronics try to recapture at least the rhythmic complexity of the MRI. So the sound is all around us, right? And so it's not just chanting or temple bells or sounds of sort of peaceful wind chimes that we think of maybe as meditative sound. Sonicism begins with this idea that there's an immediate transduction. That's the word where information or wave shapes from one medium, in this case air, are transduced into another medium, in this case really electricity, right? The synapses of the brain. And then we do all kinds of stuff to it, right? We recognize it as a piece of music or as a cat meowing or a dog barking or a train. We put stories and labels on top of that neurological information. And then further we say, oh, it's my dog, or that's a train, I like trains, or listen to that music, I love this music, it reminds me of um, the full network of experience that music triggers. But it's a whole sequence of events, and at any point those events can be manipulated, right? That's part of what composition is, and it's also part of what meditation and sound is. It's being aware of that loop and approaching it from both ways, approaching it from what the sound is, that's composition, right? Create a particular sound, which is what music is. Write something, come up with something, create something that can be listened to, that might, through that process of transduction, might induce a certain state of mind. When I talk about Messiaen, one of the reasons I find that music so interesting, right? So set aside how beautiful and wonderful I find it, how joyful it is to play it. It's interesting because I think as a composer, he's profoundly aware of the cycle, the sequence of introducing sound transduced into a message, into information that then we apply a message. And he wants that message to be the message of the Catholic liturgy and the mystery behind the Catholic liturgy. So we can create sound that comes in and tries to induce a certain experience. But we can also listen differently. We can come at it from the other way. We can come at it from that level of narrative and say that I am not going to put story and knowledge around the sound. I'm going to listen to the sound. And that's where our practice on the cushion comes in, where you can ring a bell and follow the sound. But it's also where, as we sit in quiet contemplation, if a sound that we would think of as a distraction happens, like a dog barking or a bus going by, or I live in the city, there's always sirens going by. It's easy to have that siren be a distraction and say, I cannot meditate in this noise. Well, think about that, right? There's some truth to that, particularly when we are at a point in our practice where we need a little bit of support to buttress the practice. And we always need that. We're always coming in and out of stability. But why should the sound of a siren going by be any different than the sound of the temple bell? And why should that be any different than the sound of your breath? And why should that be any different than the sound of silence? Right? So we can cultivate a certain way of listening that then might suggest introducing different types of sound that then suggests a different way of listening. So again, as with so much of this practice, it's a virtuous cycle of experience and input that we can control. So I call that sonicism. You could call it deep listening. You could call it meditation, right? I like the word sonicism because I can use it in a lot of different ways, not just with meditation, but also with my other writing. It's got a nice sort of manifesto feel to it. Sonicism. I like it. So this is not new, of course, right? Like there's always been chanting, and let's think about one particular instance of that. Let's think about Gregorian chant in a Gothic cathedral. So first and foremost, Gregorian chant is to expose the word, the actual text, right? It has to make the text present. But it is doing that in a space, a cathedral, that is designed to echo, that is designed to take the sound of a human voice or a group of human voices, and through the construction of the space, make that sound last longer than it would have. That's what an echo, that's what reverberation does, is it introduces a temporal element to what otherwise would be like me speaking. Even when I sing, which I won't do, I will save you that. The duration of my sound is limited by the duration of my breath. I can't sing when I'm out of breath. But in a space like a cathedral, the sound extends beyond when I have initially produced it. There's a technology of sound in a cathedral that takes the human voice and the word that is being shared and plasters it in space, and by doing that, extends it in time. And so our mind follows that and also extends, right? And then we're available for prayer or contemplation or meditation. As much as those buildings are a manifestation of institutional power, never, hopefully I never sound naive enough to think that that's not a factor, but they are first and foremost spiritual technology. So are the burial mounds, the Neolithic burial mounds, or the beehive temples, basilica, the beehive buildings in Greece. There's always a sonic element to these. And it's so that the content of the chant can be absorbed and experienced. The experience of the spaciousness is as essential as the lesson of the text. Boy, I'm just going to jump around. So from Neolithic sound architecture to well, I'm not going to jump around. I'm going to wrap it up because I think that's enough for now. I think what I really want to get across is that there's a practice that's available to us to listen differently, and that can be any sound or the scrutinization of silence. Is there really silence? What is the space when there's no music playing? When you sit and you're stable and aware of the breath and the thoughts, try to really hear what's being, what's occurring in that room. When we say, I'm in a silent temple, scrutinize that, see what you come up with. Because I can guarantee you that following the silence will reveal a different dynamic of sound and silence. And I'll just let that unfold for you, and then let me know what it is in the comments. Share that experience. Start with a bell if you want. Ring the bell and try to see, where does the sound really end? And do that as an experiment, like really as kind of a test. But then set back and see, where is your mind? Where are you positioned when you're listening to the bell that was struck 3 minutes ago? It stopped vibrating. What is that experience, right? And then, so that's the one side, that's the listening side. If you are, if you're then interested in using different sounds, try to have that same mindset as you're sitting. Sit outside, sit outside at a bus stop and try to meditate. At that point, it's no longer, there's no difference between meditation and simply being in the world. And that, I think, is the real power of sound, because it's such ever present, and we filter out so much of it. I'll end with this. Um, there was one morning a few weeks ago, and I know it was a few weeks ago because I was walking my dogs, and my daughter was with us, and she doesn't live in. She was visiting, so I can place it to not yesterday, but not more than a few weeks ago. We're walking around, and I suddenly realized that there was actually an incredibly loud sound that was, you know, uh, probably what it was construction equipment where they hadn't started doing the drilling, but the engines were going, and it might have been a quarter mile away. But because it was 5 o'clock in the morning, there was really no other sound. Uh, but it had taken 5 minutes to recognize that there was this sound. But if you were to do like a spectrogram of the sound, right, like just a machine recording, it's all that you would have heard. But it had been totally filtered out from my brain until I was like, what the heck is that? Just gradually impinging on my awareness that the sound world that I would have said was peaceful and silent was actually echoing with this bizarre mechanical sound that wasn't yet, I can say it wasn't yet the drilling sound, because that I would have picked up and said, oh, they're banging away already. It was just that noise of engines that are turning on for the first time and then sitting there idling, but from a distance. So if nothing else, it's a way of really understanding the filters that we put in, and they're good filters. I'm not saying that we should walk around in daily life as a blank recording machine to hear everything. There's a reason why our brain filters out that sound, but it's good to be aware of the filter so that we know what is sound, what is really there, and then what is story. So, all right, good. I really want to hear comments on this. Sound is fascinating uh, for all kinds of reasons. I'm very deaf. I'm totally deaf in one ear. I wear a hearing aid in this ear. And I'm a musician, and I compose, and I play piano. So that intersection of sound and silence and what are we really hearing is like, it's like coffee in the morning to me. So thank you all, and keep your wits about you.